something that makes them worthy of applause, but some powers leave us scratching our heads. Wolverine's healing factor is a mystery. It can make him come back from anything, it seems. It's truly amazing what Wolverine has survived. He survived being at point zero for the bombing of Hiroshima, being one of the men at the Valentine's Day Massacre, multiple world wars, fighting death, being completely destroyed aside from a single drop of himself. How is he still standing? I don't get it. I think Deadpool explains it best. He survives because he's popular. You can't kill off Wolverine. He's Wolverine. He's iconic. Every time he goes away, we want him back. So is it a powerful healing factor keeping the hero around, or fan devotion? I'm not complaining though. Love our Canadian king. Looking forward to seeing Hugh Jackman don the blue and yellow in Wolverine and Deadpool in a few months. Bailey Hoskins is thebomb.com. Literally, he is a bomb. He can blow up, but only once. His power seems ridiculous because that was the point. Bailey debuted in Worst X-Men Ever by Max Bemis. Max wanted to explore what it would be like if someone joined the X-Men that was basically useless until death. Still, you have to wonder, how does Bailey even know how to detonate without ever being able to practice? Is it like breathing? He just knows. How often did he get close to detonation just from sneezing wrong? He got a power suit at one point, but was usually just his human appearing self. His miniseries is cute and pokes fun at the X-Men franchise, so if that's your thing, check it out. Lila Cheney is a rock star and ally to the X-Men. Lila wasn't always a good guy. She did try to steal the Earth once, but she eventually came around. She is capable of intergalactic teleportation. The problem is she can't control it. She also can't travel short distances. It has to be thousands of miles away. I don't understand why. The current explanation is that to teleport she creates a Tachyon field around herself. The field converts matter into particles that are faster than the speed of light. The only thing she can control is what direction she goes in. Apparently once she activates her powers, they just go before she can even think stop. She's already super far away. But in order for her to go anywhere, she needs to specifically know it. If that is the case, shouldn't she just be able to picture her kitchen and go there? To get around the teleportation glitch, she set up a sort of base point, the Dyson sphere. She goes there first, then to her next point, kinda like a plane connection. The other thing is that if her voice is somewhere, she can teleport there. It can cause problems because she is a famous singer, her voice is in a lot of places, but if she has to know specifically where she wants to go, shouldn't just having her voice somewhere not cut it? I don't get it. Ariel the alien is known for her teleportation powers and ability to persuade anyone. You might also recognize her for her bright, over-the-top outfits. She was designed in the 80s and it shows in the most iconic way. The Met Gala is coming up soon and I can't help but think she would fit right in. Ariel is from the planet Coconut Grove and it looks like your average 80s nightclub. All Coconut Grove aliens are capable of teleportation using doors. If there are no doors, too bad. But what I'm confused about is that this ability is apparently not limited to just Coconut Grove residents. It's suggested that anyone could do it if they have the right hands and a good grounding in subjective physics. Has this ever been explored again? I don't think so. Let me know if I'm forgetting something. The only other time I've seen door teleportation like this was in Monsters Inc. In addition to the door powers, Ariel and her family are the mutants of their world, as they are capable of super persuasion. Ariel is described as she who speaks like water running across the stones. Ariel can make people do or think almost anything she wants using her charming, persuasive voice. However, it seems like a lot of the effectiveness is based on what language she uses, how she knows what to use. I don't know, probably lots of trial and error. Ariel ended up in San Francisco and then joined the X-Men and stayed affiliated with the team since. Hector Mendoza has transparent skin. How is that useful? I'm not sure. Maybe for scientists to study the functions of the human body in real time. Hector did have another power and it caused the see-through skin. It was an invisibility field. The unfortunate part was that the invisibility didn't work all the way and his skin turned invisible instead of all of him. I don't really know what would be worse, your mutant ability manifesting seemingly halfway and you walk around with your organs out all the time, or if it actually manifested completely and you were invisible forever. He was also able to transfer his invisibility field by touching someone else. He would go back to normal and whoever he touched was affected. And I do suppose in a battle situation that would be a good kind of like psych out tactic. Personally, I'm not used to seeing my organs, so if I were to ever grab this guy with malicious intent, seeing my internal organs would absolutely send me into a panic and he would win. I'm still confused though. Hector was one of the mutants that was depowered after M Day, so he would have just returned to normal again.
The mutants on Earth 616 were different from the ultimate X-Men of Earth 1610 in a big way. A really big way. Like the biggest way that you could ever imagine possible. They would learn that they weren't exactly as different from the humans as they originally thought. Instead, they learned that the X gene in their bodies actually came from a version of the super soldier serum, which they'd been exposed to through the water supply. This meant that they weren't an evolution of man, but instead were more like a rogue science experiment. This revelation was a massive one for one mutant in particular. That mutant, Magneto. Magneto had built an ideology around the fact that mutants should rise against humans and rule over them as their race was, in essence, superior. An interesting take for someone who lived through World War II and experienced persecution during that time. But hey, I digress, that's how the story goes. Magneto learning that humans and mutants weren't really that different and that mutants weren't an evolution of mankind shattered much of what he had built his ideology on, breaking him in a way. Something different that I feel like it would do to him in 616 as well, just based on what his beliefs are like forged on. Wolverine's power set is also very different in the Ultimate Universe than it is in the mainstream one. On Earth 1610, Wolverine's powers are a little more loosey-goosey, if you will. And in a way they could be seen as more powerful considering they aren't as clearly understood or defined. It's believed that Wolverine doesn't actually have a healing factor here, but instead has, how do I want to put this, survival powers, which allow him to mutate in whichever way he needs to ultimately survive. This means you could technically remove his head from his body and he could just keep on surviving, or separate his torso from his lower half and he'd also just keep going on. Both of these events have pretty much happened to him in the comics and he's shown to survive them. That's why I use them here. However, on the other hand, some may see this as a weaker version of his power set, considering Wolverine doesn't really have the possibility to regrow his limbs at all, although even in, honestly, on Earth 616, that isn't always something he can do anyways. It kind of depends on who's writing him and how boosted he is at that time in terms of his powers. Instead, he has to find his body parts here and assemble them once more if he wants to be whole again. However, he also doesn't need those body parts to survive, so When it comes to this next change, I actually kind of love this shift. Well, I love this shift in some ways. I love the character that we got out of it. I don't love the weird family history behind it as much though, which is bizarre. We're talking about Jimmy Hudson. Jimmy Hudson is Wolverine's secret son. He was taken in by a friend of Wolverine's who he served alongside in the war. Logan figured that Jimmy would have a better life with the Hudsons. When his powers manifested, not knowing his true parentage, Jimmy was pretty confused. He would eventually be visited by Kitty Pryde, who would give Jimmy some of his father's effects, allowing Jimmy to learn the truth of who his biological father really was. But who was Jimmy's mom? Why, of course, none other than the wife of Magneto, Magda Lencher. I'm sorry, what? Instead of the Shi'ar being an alien race in the Ultimate X-Men comics set in the reality of Earth 1610, the Shi'ar here is more of a church that is guided by supposed alien knowledge. Lalandra Naramani is still the Magistrix here, but instead she is the Magistrix of the church as opposed to, you know, the Shi'ar Galactic Empire. She is the church's leader. Yeah. It's weird. The church was built around the idea that an alien god would one day return, which would bring about a great shift in the universe, creating a new utopia for all. In the Ultimate Universe of Earth 1610, the Phoenix Force was much more than an extremely ancient and powerful entity. It was believed to be the god that had created all life. Yeah, on Earth 1610, Phoenix is some one above all level kind of being, or is believed to be that anyway. It's believed that the Phoenix created all life, and as life evolved, it became jealous of their god, the Phoenix, and sought to imprison her. The Phoenix Force, or Phoenix God if you prefer, is the entity that the Church of Shi'ar Enlightenment worships, seeing the Phoenix God as a savior who will one day be reborn in a human and basically bring about a universal utopia. They believe, of course, that Jean is this destined host, because of course, why not? And of course, she does become the Phoenix. That part at least is similar to the Earth 616 narrative, so many of us are familiar with. However, the role of the Phoenix here is somewhat changed, I would say. As if the Phoenix Force wasn't powerful enough, of course, the Ultimate Comics just had to make her a god too, that like created all things. Granted, that's just what some people believe, so who knows? Probably not, because the one above all, I believe, is on a greater scheme of the multiverse the creator of all things. Pretty sure. I promise this is my last point concerning the Phoenix, but I just find this whole shift of it being a god who's worshipped by a church named after the Shi'ar to just be so strange. It's so weird. You know, the evil gathering of rich weirdos who like to run the world from behind the scenes and also cosplay as Victorian villains? Well, in the Ultimate Comics, this group is not just a mutant villain group, but is also closely tied to the Church of Shi'ar Enlightenment. That's right, we're talking about the Hellfire Club, baby. Because they're attached to the church for some reason. In this version, the Hellfire Club's origins extend well beyond their founding in the mid-18th century, all the way back to the days of ancient Egypt, where they once worshipped the Phoenix god. However, the Hellfire Club ended up being split off from the church, instead becoming a separate sect based on the belief that the destructive nature of the Phoenix god would bring with it great power should the Phoenix be freed. So they want to free the Phoenix so it can destroy everything, and then they'll get power. I suppose. Everything leads back to the Phoenix here. In a way, it's kind of neat to see all the threads, but in another way, it feels like a bit much to have everything come together just so neatly. It's both something I like and something that kind of irks me in general about the Ultimate Universe, having that retrospective on many of the working parts in Marvel that allows everything to feel like it's part of a grander design, because we're building it sort of after the fact as opposed to it kind of tumbling one thing after the other, which is how it organically happens in 616. I mean, it's neater, but do I want it to be neater? I don't know. Mr. Sinister has a completely different vibe in the Ultimate Universe. He is still an X-Men villain, but instead of teaming up with another X-Men villain, who is the biggest bad around, Apocalypse, who also basically makes Nathaniel Essex into what he is, Nathaniel instead works for Spider-Man villain Norman Osborn, experimenting on himself to modify his genes and grant himself superpowers as he worked on creating his basically own psionic brand of the super soldier serum. He gained powers but lost his sanity and began to hallucinate visions of Lord Apocalypse, who commanded him. Eventually, he would also seemingly transform into Lord Apocalypse, but be revealed to still exist beneath Apocalypse's exterior when he goes up against the Phoenix. Not to say that Sinister was ever fully sane on Earth 616 or anything like that, but on Earth 1610, he's kind of a whole other level of mad scientist, if you ask me. Also, all of his tattoos. Super tatted up Sinister. Because it's Ultimate Comics and we gotta be edgy. Okay, I don't want to get into spoilers for the new Ultimate stuff too much since it just came out, but I do want to talk about it a little bit more because I've been waiting so long to talk about it, so I'm gonna use this list as an opportunity. So we know that the X-Men seemingly don't exist in the Ultimate Universe of Earth 6160 just yet. At least, you know, like I said, not as far as we know. I mean, I haven't read everything, so maybe I don't think they exist yet, so I'm just gonna say that. So the question remains of what the first issue of this comic is going to be about. Well, if you've seen the previews, you may have known what to expect somewhat in terms of the tone here. But something I don't think any of us were expecting is the seeming redefinition of what it means to be mutant in this new Ultimate Universe. At least that's what I'm picking up. The tone is also a huge and honestly super interesting shift for me, but also just the reshaping and framing of mutant experience is super fascinating and just different. I'm not sure where exactly it's going yet. I'm a little like, what's happening? But boy, oh boy, I am here for this ride. I don't understand it, but I love it anyways, you know what I mean? And if you haven't checked it out yet, I'd highly recommend you do Ultimate X-Men issue number 1, and when you do, share your thoughts with us in the comments, because I'd love to talk to you about it. The premise for the new Ultimate Universe, Earth 6160, is that the Maker has made it all from scratch with his ideals at its core. The universe is ruled in secret by its own villainous version of the Illuminati, and the Maker made this reality with the intention of it not really having any superheroes. So already we're off to a rough start for our X-Men who, despite the title of their comic, Ultimate X-Men, do not seemingly exist. At least not at the start, or at least not as far as we know. Clearly, based on the title, we're diving into a world where our heroes will somehow come to be and exist in some form, but just what their role will be, well, it's still a little too early to tell. Based on my familiarity with their previous work with Marvel in regards to the creators behind this series, Peach Momoko and her script adapter Zach Davison, I'm sure it will be very different from what we've come to expect when it comes to our X-Men stories. Let me know what some of your favorite unexpected X-Men stories have been in the comments. For me, Peach Momoko is definitely one of the tops. Definitely, if you haven't read Demon Days. Do yourself a favor, go do that. Back to the original alternate reality of Earth 1610 though now. Jean Grey has a complex history when it comes to the Ultimate Comics, the original Ultimate Comics. But one of the most bizarre character shifts for her happens during World War X. She goes from being a mutant on the run, living under the identity of Karen Grant, to kind of a fascist leader who attempts to forcefully unite Tian and Utopia, willing to do anything to make this happen, even some honestly pretty sinister stuff. I mean, I know Jean has had her moments on Earth 616, but this was a character shift that not only was a change from her usual characterization in the main continuity, but even honestly felt like a shift from her Earth 1610 self, especially when you consider the Phoenix isn't involved in turning her dark here. At least as far as I can tell. When I imagine Juggernaut in a film, I think Deadpool did the character more justice. Also fun to see that Ryan Reynolds was also the voice of Juggy in the films, kinda love it. In Deadpool 2, Juggernaut's helmet mostly obscures what appears to be a supersized, overly wide face. It feels as though Kane's power set modifies his look, making him a giant, strong man, as opposed to just, you know, someone who is granted super strength while remaining normal size because of his armor and because of Sidorak and all that stuff. He is a beast in those films, made with the help of David Leitch CGI and being given a voice through Reynolds' portrayal of him. Whereas in the X-Men films he was played by, also I would say a badass, Vinnie Jones, but his appearance, costume, and stance just don't really sell us as much on the character. In fact, it kinda just makes Vinnie look ridiculous, which I also feel like is just silly because I do feel like Vinnie Jones could have been a good Juggernaut. Maybe that's a hot take, I don't know. Y'all can let me know in the comments if that's a hot take. Maybe one of the weirdest moments of all time from this series, this one comes to us from X-Men The Last Stand, and of course involves Juggernaut. Juggernaut already has been discussed. I mean, that costume is, like I said, it's a vibe for sure. But during X-Men The Last Stand, Juggernaut also decides to put on some attitude to match his look and menacing power set as well. At one point he says, in the vein of Britney Spears' "It's Britney bitch, don't you know who I am? I'm the Juggernaut, bitch." I mean, if you are trying to intimidate people, Kane, I think there are just like better lines you could have gone with. I know Kane isn't always shown to be the brightest bulb in the bunch, both inside and outside of the comics, but like, we know what his name is. It's not, that part is not very intimidating. I mean, I guess his name is the Juggernaut, so I guess that sounds, I mean, no, it just doesn't. It really doesn't. This line is just pretty goofy, especially when we look back at it. It also just seems weirdly unnecessary as well, to be honest. Just overall. Not necessarily a moment in the movie, but let's talk for a moment about Bryan Singer, who all in all is quite a complex individual, to put it lightly. Bryan Singer has been considered downright dastardly by some and condemned for both his onset and his offset behavior. But at the same time, there are others who have worked with him, specifically some of the cast of the X-Men films, who also felt that he was actually an amazing director despite his flaws. Sure, he wasn't always prepared or on time, and he was known to behave inappropriately, but there are actors who still were impressed by the fact that even sometimes without like seemingly like being super prepared, he knew how to get his shots and get what he needed out of his actors. So he could just come to set and he would just like bing bang boom, get it done. In that regard, most of the cast found themselves actually impressed with his abilities as a director. But there is also something that exists separate from, I would say, his behavior. He was never a fan of the X-Men comics. What? Which is pretty wild to consider. But it makes sense when you take a look at the films. For Singer, the appeal for the X-Men films was actually in exploring the analogy between the mutants and real-world prejudice and discrimination that certain people and groups face. Found that fascinating, and that's basically why he was like, I definitely want to do this. It looks cool. I don't want to read these comics, but I do want to do this comic book superhero movie. This one is both great and also awkward. It happened in X-Men First Class, and while overall it's actually honestly a pretty fun time, it's also a pretty weird scene when you have the context of like the original Fox X-Men films, where Magneto and Professor X at that point are more seen as elderly men, you know? This is back when the two were recruiting, and it is under this guise that they go to an adult dance club together. It's here that they encounter Angel. No, not that Angel. This Angel seems to be more based on Angel Salvador, and yeah, it's pretty awkward. Also kind of odd when you consider that Angel Salvador is actually a newer mutant who meets Charles when he is much older in the comics, so also just kind of strange in terms of that. This is a comic book moment in the worst way, and by that I mean it feels like just lazy and bad writing. Now, this is not something comic books are known for per se. I'm not saying that comic book stuff is lazy and bad writing, because usually that's not the case, but it is something that some of the worst comic book moments typically exhibit, like this movie-based comic book moment, which as far as I know isn't actually based off of anything specific. from the comics. Other than that, sometimes yes, Wolverine does suffer from muddled or completely wiped memories, and yes, he has been shot before in the head and that has messed up his memories. Usually though his memories get messed up because he's in some kind of facility where they have that tech, or because of trauma that he suffered in his life. However, here Stryker isn't using any fancy machine, but instead he's just hoping that adamantium bullets are gonna do the job. Very bizarre. What's even more bizarre is that this is the intent here. It's just to wipe his mind. That's his intent. Because he's not sure if he can actually kill Logan. How did he even know that this would work? This all goes down, of course, in X-Men Origins Wolverine, because that is where that would go down, isn't it? This machine is admittedly pretty ridiculous when you think about it, but as with most things in the Fox movies, it's just really better if you just don't think about it too much, you know? The mutant conversion machine was something that Magneto created to turn others into mutants. I mean, it didn't work long term, but it did work in the short term. In the first X-Men film, he kidnaps Senator Kelly and uses the machine on him. The whole idea of how it works is kind of wonky and very kind of comic book science-y, with it even being powered by Magneto's own powers, which produced a mutant creating radiation field. Magnets, everyone. What can't they do? Both in the comics and in the films, apparently. I mean, you know me, I love a good goofy magnet moment as much as the next person. I just talked about all the weird ways that Magneto uses magnets over on my personal channel, but going back to this film and thinking about this machine, it's just a bit much, even for me. I'm cool with Magneto having his magnetic personality even, but using his powers to harness what is a mutant radiation field is just a bit too much for me in my mind. What does that even mean? One of the weirdest things for me when I go back to the movies is the revelation that Jean is a doctor here. Dr. Jean Grey. Dr. Grey. This would, in ways, be incorporated into the comics, or I've seen it kind of come up sorta at certain moments. There have been versions of Jean who uses her psionic powers to basically learn how to be a medical doctor and then kind of use those skills to treat others, thereby kind of becoming a doctor herself, although not, you know, formally. However, for the most part, this is not a part of Jean's canonical origins. At least not on Earth 616 it isn't. So it's always seemed weird to me in the movies that Jean just was going to be a doctor, that she was like, that's what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna be a doctor. I would say it's pretty different from Jean's focus in the comics, which tends to be more, I guess, emotional as opposed to scientific or medical, if anything. For the most part, Jean is seen as simply an empathetic hero who works alongside the X-Men. That being said, I guess she could also have other pursuits, but in a way she feels like she's kind of filling in for the roles of Charles somewhat in the movies here, by being the person to explain what mutants are from a genetic and evolutionary standpoint, which usually tends to be what Charles does in the comics. Something we've seen him do before anyways, since he's literally a man who is usually studied genetics, specializing in mutant genetics, so yeah. You know, something is really weird when I'm struggling to even find a clip of it to prove that I wasn't crazy in imagining it in terms of its existence. However, while I wasn't able to find the exact clip, I was able to find a lot of people on the internet who were able to back me up with their memories of this weird mutant power. So yay, thank you the internet. In X2 we meet Jones, whose mutant power is seemingly to change the channel by blinking. Yep, I mean, I know there are a lot of weird mutant powers out there, but this feels weird even for mutants. Grant Morrison is often considered the writer most well known for going ham with weird mutants, so in this regard it could mean that the comics influenced us to get Jones, whose power could extend beyond changing the channel with blinks, but it's never really more clearly defined based on what we see of this mutant. I guess the difference is that in the comics our lovable weirdos like Glob Herman, Beak, or Eye-Boy tend to at least get some more development over time in regards to both their power sets and mutant abilities, and just who they are as people as well, I would say. Sadly, Jones did not get as much time as someone like Eye-Boy has.
Very similar to Hector, the same but different, is Glob. Glob is made of bioparaffin wax, or living wax. He is a glob of it that commonly takes the form of a human body. The wax is flammable, so he can become a flaming version of himself. He can also fling bits of himself. I have to wonder about that one though. Are the bits kind of like fingernails? Like when I lose a piece of my fingernail, it will just grow back? I'm assuming, because he is never lacking wax. He is considered invincible since his wax makes him resistant to damage. He once took a bomb for the Institute and came out fine. Tough kid. I would say that another one of his superpowers is that he's funny. Zorn is a confusing character overall. His origin was one thing and then it was another. He was actually Magneto. Wait, never mind. We need Magneto alive for something else. Okay, Zorn is actually real, and also his head is a star. Sorry? What? Someone's head being a star? That's wild. It's a marvel he keeps that thing star even if it is just mini. Because it's a star, he could reverse the natural state of it to make a black hole. It also means he has magnetokinesis, or the ability to control magnetic fields. That's why he could fake being Magneto. The star also produces a blinding light because if you were to look him in the eyes, you would be staring into a mini sun. It can also incinerate you, so you will not make it out of there no matter what. He also, because his head is a star, doesn't need to breathe or eat or drink water. I've never got that in anything. If someone has a body, how is it sustained without those things? I don't get it, unfortunately. Give me a few days of thinking time, I will get there. Zoran is also a vibe checker. He knows if someone has passed in his general vicinity. I think it has something to do with the fact that he can feel the movement of energy and emotions, I think. Ice Cream, as a whole, I don't understand, but the powers especially. Ice Cream is a mutant that can turn into ice cream. Any flavor, he's not limited. It does have its benefits. Turning into a pile of ice cream means he can slip through grates and tight spaces. However, I can't imagine he is good on the offensive front unless his opponent is lactose intolerant. I suppose he could turn into ice cream and drown someone from the inside out, then that person would have to go to the afterlife with the story that they drowned from ice cream, and that's just funny or embarrassing. The last time I talked about ice cream, I mentioned that in addition to ice cream, he could even turn into a banana split. Someone commented on the video pointing out that a banana split isn't ice cream. You're right, I know that. That's why I'm so confused. Who came up with this? Ice Cream has only appeared about like 2 times in the comics. I wonder why. Though he has limited appearances, that does not mean he has no fans. The additional confusing thing about him is he doesn't spell it ice cream with like the letter I, it's E-Y-E, and there's no explanation as to why that is. Soft Serve is a big fan of ice cream. Sometimes talking about certain characters brings me physical pain, and Soft Serve is one of them. Soft Serve is a mutant that poops ice cream. I hope no one is watching this video while eating ice cream. If you are, I'm sorry. Soft Serve can create any flavor of ice cream, and apparently it's actually pretty good. Forge tried it and said it was great. He definitely took one for the team. I don't think many X-Men are strong enough to do that. Obviously, the power is weird. It's weird, so how did it happen? It turns out that she isn't really using her own body to create the ice cream. Her body is actually a portal to the ice cream dimension. So the portal on her body just happens to be in an unfortunate location. Other than her being a big fan of ice cream, the pair are not related. Soft Serve also, shockingly, has only 2 appearances. Mystique has recently been revealed to be a gene shaper, not just a shapeshifter, which is very cool and very confusing. The difference, to put it simply, shapeshifters change their shape, they mimic someone else's look. Gene shapers become that person, rewriting their DNA until they are a copy. That's how Mystique was able to become Nightcrawler's father instead of mother. She gave herself male working anatomy. The thing that has fans wondering though is if she can become an exact gene level copy of someone, why can't she replicate mutant abilities? She can copy them, sure, we've seen that when she copied Wolverine's claws, but that was all surface level. She never actually fully gains the powers. It turns out that the reason might be simple, but also makes everything way more complicated. Mystique appears to currently be limited when it comes to mimicking the X gene. Regular genes walk in the park, she doesn't even need to think about it. It's the X gene that's tricky. Does that mean she can't? No, she probably can if we are being honest. Now that the big reveal of Nightcrawler's parents has been done, Mystique's writers have the ability to explore her X gene mimicking abilities.